Hi guys, let's talk about the practice of feeling elevated emotional states, what we often do in brain retraining or self-directed neuroplasticity. And I know for many of you, like me, it was very difficult, especially when you've been sick and you've been in a real funk for a long time. And it is difficult at first to elevate, to self-generate feelings of safety and joy and calm when we've been suffering. And that is because our body over time actually becomes addicted to those states of stress, of fear, of hopelessness. It's literally an addiction. And you're going to have to break that habit of addiction, and you're going to have to help show your body that it's safe to feel hopeful, happy, joyful, trusting. And so it starts by acknowledging to parts of you that is really wanting to stay in protection, to not have disappointment and loss and grief. I know a part of me was scared to be hopeful of healing because what if it didn't happen? And I had to acknowledge that part of me and say, I know you're scared to feel hopeful and to visualize having this abundant health just in case it doesn't happen. But if we don't do this, the likelihood of it happening is even less. It is through generating elevated emotional states that signal new neuropeptides, new hormones, new neurotransmitters to run through the body, to shift the way our organs function, to shift the way our immune system functions. We have to send a signal of safety into the body. And that has to be done internally. No pill is going to do that to you. So whatever you can do to help those protective parts of you that are afraid to feel safe, having that self-talk and say, this is important that I practice this. This is important that we go for this, even though we don't know what the outcomes are. We're better off and safer learning how to imagine that future possibility, even though we don't know if we're going to get it. The other thing I want to say is that when you start practicing feeling elevated emotions, it's almost like you have to walk through layers of resistance of very uncomfortable feelings. So as we're seeking for joy, you might have emotions of shame or of guilt or of grief start to come up. And while it is important to feel that, if you're doing a brain retraining practice, we want to acknowledge those feelings and say, okay, I feel you grief, I feel you shame. I'm going to come back and sit with this with more of a somatic practice later on, but right now I'm working on my emotional elevation, and I need to do that to help my body process these other emotions. So letting these parts of you know that you'll come back to them, that you're not going to ignore them and dismiss them. You're not going to ignore the shame, the grief, the anger. You're going to come back to it at the appropriate time. So you're starting to put boundaries around these parts of you and around those feelings. And it is important to go back and say, all right, I'm back. I'm ready to listen. Maybe you start journaling to get into that feeling that was coming up during brain retraining. You start teaching your psyche that you mean it, that you want to emotionally elevate, but you also don't want to bypass what might be in there. And so later on, when you have some more resourcing, or maybe with a therapist or a coach, you work on some of those denser emotions where you're meeting them and feeling them and somatically moving those through the body. So those are a couple of tips I have for you today for those of you on the path of emotional elevation and brain retraining.